Rachel inherited debt, but her children inherited a foundation.
What is this?
Your husband's debt.
8 months earlier, Rachel had buried her husband, Daniel. He was 43. There had been no long illness, no months to prepare for goodbye. One week, he was complaining about Lagos traffic and promising the children they would visit the beach on Saturday. The next, Rachel was choosing the clothes he would be buried in. But grief wasn't the only thing Daniel left behind. There were loans, supplier debts, unpaid bills, money he had borrowed trying to rescue his struggling food business. Rachel hadn't known how bad things had become. Whenever she asked, Daniel always said the same thing: "I'll sort it out." He never got the chance. Within months, almost everything they could sell was gone. The generator, the second television, some furniture, even Daniel's car. Rachel took every catering job she could find, but there was always another bill waiting. Then came the afternoon the creditors gave her 7 days. That evening, Rachel sat at the dining table with a notebook and calculator. She calculated the money, 78,000 naira. Then, the debt. More than 2 million. There was no calculation that could make the two numbers meet. She closed the notebook. A few seconds later, she heard footsteps. Her 12-year-old son, Ethan, stood beside her, holding a small envelope. He placed it on the table. Rachel opened it. Inside were crumpled naira notes. "Where did you get this?" Ethan looked down. He had been saving money from birthdays, Christmas gifts, and the little amounts his father used to give him. He wanted to buy a bicycle. But Ethan had overheard Rachel talking about his school fees, so he gave her everything. Rachel looked at the small pile of money. It couldn't solve the problem. But that wasn't what hurt. Her 12-year-old son had started carrying problems that belonged to adults. That night, after the children went to sleep, Rachel made herself a promise. Whatever happened next, debt would not become the family tradition. Her children deserved a better beginning.
The following morning, Mrs. Williams knocked on Rachel's door. She had known Daniel for almost 20 years and ran a small provision store 2 streets away. One look at Rachel's face was enough. They sat together, and Rachel told her everything. The deadline, the debt, the shop. When she finished, Mrs. Williams remained quiet for a moment. Then she asked,
"The old shop smelled of dust and cardboard. Empty shelves lined the walls. A broken plastic chair sat behind the counter. Old receipts and forgotten kitchen equipment were scattered around the room." Rachel folded her arms. "There, you see?" Mrs. Williams ignored her and started cleaning. Ethan had followed them. While moving some cartons behind the counter, he noticed something. "Mom, what's this?" He pulled out a small metal box. Rachel recognized it immediately. It belonged to Daniel. She opened it. There were old receipts, a few photographs, and underneath them, a thick notebook with a dark stain across its cover. Rachel slowly picked it up. Daniel used to carry that notebook everywhere when his business was doing well. She opened it. Supplier contacts, cost calculations, delivery notes. Then she reached a section she had completely forgotten.
Mama's pepper sauce. Rachel remembered. Daniel had spent months developing the sauce from his mother's recipe, and Rachel had helped him. There had been countless evenings in their kitchen, tasting one batch after another. Too salty, too smoky, too thick.
Try again. Eventually, they got it right. People loved it. A few restaurants had even asked Daniel whether he could supply them. But before he could pursue the idea, problems with his main business consumed his attention. Rachel kept turning the pages. Daniel had documented everything: measurements, ingredient costs, suppliers, packaging ideas, names of potential customers. Then she saw a sentence at the bottom of one page. 5 words.
Start small. Grow with profit. Rachel read it again. For 8 months, she had believed Daniel left nothing useful behind. She had been wrong. That afternoon, Rachel went back into her kitchen. She didn't borrow money. She didn't order expensive packaging. She didn't try to build a company overnight. She bought only enough ingredients for a small batch. By evening, 24 bottles of pepper sauce stood on her kitchen counter. Ethan took pictures with her phone. Rachel posted them on WhatsApp. Then they waited. An hour passed. Nothing. 2 hours. Still nothing. Rachel began wondering whether she had just wasted some of the little money she had left. Then at 8:17 that evening, her phone buzzed. 1 order. 3 bottles. An old church friend. The next morning, another customer ordered 2. Mrs. Williams bought 6 for her shop. It wasn't much, but Rachel had something she hadn't had the day before. A product people were willing to pay for. She used the money to make another batch. 24 bottles became 48, then 60. On the 3rd day, a restaurant owner named Marcus walked into Mrs. Williams.
He noticed one of the bottles and bought it out of curiosity. 2 hours later, he came back. He wanted 12. The following day, he wanted 30. His customers had started asking about the pepper sauce he served with his grilled meat. Then, one customer posted it online. Another person shared it. Orders began coming from Yaba, Ikeja, Lecky. For the first time since Daniel died, Rachel's phone wouldn't stay quiet. But every time an order came in, Rachel remembered the envelope sitting inside her shop. Because the business might have been growing, but the 7th day was coming.
On the 5th evening, Rachel received a call. A catering company had tasted her sauce through one of Marcus's customers. They wanted a large order for an upcoming event. Rachel's heart jumped. Then she calculated the production cost. Her excitement disappeared. She didn't have enough money to make it. For a moment, she considered borrowing, just enough to fulfill the order. Then she looked at Daniel's notebook. Start small, grow with profit. Rachel picked up her phone. She told the company she could fulfill the order, but production would begin after an agreed deposit. There was silence on the other end. Rachel waited. Then came the answer. Send your account details. The deposit arrived that evening. Rachel went straight to work. For the next 2 days, the kitchen became a small production room. Mrs. Williams helped with preparation. Ethan attached labels after finishing his homework. His younger sister Sophie was given the simple job of counting bottles. She kept losing count and starting again. At one point, Ethan accused her of counting the same 6 bottles 3 times. Sophie insisted the bottles were moving. Rachel laughed. A real laugh. The kind her children hadn't heard in months. For a few seconds, she stopped what she was doing and looked at them. Daniel wasn't there. The debt was still waiting. But somehow, their home felt alive again. The 7th morning arrived. The large order was ready, but Legos had one more problem waiting for Rachel. Traffic. The delivery rider called from the road. He hadn't moved properly in almost 20 minutes. Rachel checked the time. The catering company needed the order before their event began. If the delivery failed, the balance wouldn't come. And without that balance, she couldn't settle the debt. Rachel called the writer again. No answer. 5 minutes later, she tried again. Still nothing. Then her phone rang. It was him. He had found another route. Rachel sat down. There was nothing left for her to do but wait. 40 minutes later, a message appeared. Delivered.
Rachel exhaled, but the money still hadn't arrived. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Rachel refreshed her banking app. Nothing. A vehicle stopped outside. Rachel looked through the window. The black SUV. The creditors were back. One of the men stepped out, carrying the same brown envelope. Rachel's phone was still in her hand. No payment. The man walked toward the shop. Then, her phone vibrated. Rachel looked down. Payment received. She checked the amount. Her hands became still. She added it to what she had already made. Still short.
Not by much, but short was short. The man entered the shop. "Mrs. Cole?" Rachel looked up. Before she could answer, her phone rang. Marcus. She almost ignored it, but something made her answer. Marcus wanted to make the sauce a permanent item at his restaurant, a weekly supply, and he wanted the first delivery immediately. Rachel told him the quantity she could provide. Marcus agreed. Then he paid up front. The alert appeared. Rachel stared at her balance. This time, it was enough. The creditor placed his envelope on the counter. Rachel placed her phone beside it. "The debt is settled." He looked at her. Rachel showed him the payment confirmation. He checked it carefully, then checked again. For the first time since she met him. The man seemed unsure what to say. His eyes moved around the shop. 7 days earlier, the shelves had been almost empty. Now, bottles stood neatly across them. Boxes were stacked against the wall. A delivery rider was loading an order outside. The man picked up his envelope. Then he pointed toward the shelves. What happened here? Rachel looked around the little shop Daniel had fought so hard to keep. Then she smiled. I found what he left me. 7 years passed. The little shop remained. Rachel refused to close it, even after the business grew beyond its walls. It reminded her where everything changed. But success taught Rachel something else. Making money wasn't enough. She needed to make sure her children understood how to build, protect, and pass on what they had. So she saved. She invested. She bought assets. She taught Ethan and Sophie how the business worked. She showed them the mistakes their parents had made as carefully as she showed them their successes. And she wrote everything down. One evening, 19-year-old Ethan walked into her room. Rachel was writing inside a large book. He smiled. Another pepper sauce recipe? Rachel laughed. No. She handed him the book. Ethan opened it. There were records of investments, business lessons, property documents, financial instructions, plans for the company, and letters addressed to him and Sophie. Ethan looked at his mother. What is all this? Rachel closed the book gently. What I'm leaving for you. Ethan became quiet. On a shelf nearby sat the old metal box they had discovered 7 years earlier. Daniel's notebook was still inside. Rachel followed Ethan's eyes. Your father left us more than debt, she said. I just couldn't see it at first. She touched the book in Ethan's hands. He left knowledge. We built on it. Then she smiled. Now you and Sophie won't have to start where we started. Ethan looked down at the book. 7 years earlier, he had emptied his childhood savings because he was afraid his mother couldn't pay his school fees. Now, Rachel was handing him something entirely different. A foundation. Rachel never became the richest woman in Lagos,
That wasn't her greatest achievement. Her greatest achievement was that the struggle that reached her would not reach her children in the same way. Daniel had left behind a notebook. Rachel turned it into a business. Then she turned the business into something her children could build upon. Because a good inheritance isn't always a fortune waiting in a bank account. Sometimes it is knowledge. Sometimes it is a skill. Sometimes it is an asset. Sometimes it is simply making sure the people coming after you don't have to rebuild everything you already learned to build. Rachel inherited debt, but her children inherited a foundation.
Rachel
And
inherited
sometimes
debt,
changing what the next generation inherits
but her
is how you
children
change the story of an
inherited a
entire
foundation.
family. The end.